Well, hello and welcome to Push to Be More. I'm your host, Matt Edmondson, and this podcast, oh yes, we dive deep into the exploration of what really makes life life. And joining me today, I have an exciting guest, Mr. Matthew Brackett from Brackett Alliance. We're going to be diving into his unique life experiences, the hurdles he has had to push through, the way he recharges his batteries, and the steps he's taking to be more. Ah, yes, looking forward to this one. Now, don't forget, you can find all the detailed show notes and transcript of our conversation over at pushtobemore.com. And whilst you're there, why not sign up for our weekly newsletter? Each week, we will send you all of the show's insights, links, and goodies directly to your inbox, absolutely free, which is brilliant. Now, this episode is proudly powered, I love that phrase, proudly powered by Orion Media, the magic behind the scenes that lets entrepreneurs and business leaders like you and me amplify our voices by hosting our own podcast. But you might be thinking, why on earth would I want to do that? Well, let me tell you, my podcast journey has been nothing short of transformational. It's not just about marketing, although to be fair, it's a large part of it. It's also about community, connection, and amplification. It's given me a platform to celebrate my customers, my team, my suppliers, and created a ripple of impact far beyond what I could have possibly imagined. But I get it. The technical stuff can feel daunting. Setup, distribution, getting the tech right, understanding the strategy. The list goes on. And honestly, who wants to get tangled up into production? Because I sure don't. I used to do all the podcast production, did not enjoy it one little bit. And that's where Orion Media steps in. They are the backstage crew that make sure your show goes on flawlessly. You get to do what you love, which is engaging with incredible people. And Orion Media takes care of all the nitty-gritty details. So if you've been wondering whether podcasting is the missing puzzle piece for your growth strategy, and I think it probably is, it's time to have a chat with Orion Media. Check them out at orionmedia.com. That's AURION media.com. And of course, the link will be in the show notes. So that is today's show sponsor. Let's talk about today's guest. With a rich 30-year voyage in personal, professional, and intercultural leadership development, Matthew is an executive coach and so much more. Imagine him, as you will, as a human Swiss Army knife, being the go-to consultant, coach, and confidant for high-performing leaders, aiding them to balance personal and professional realms, thereby enhancing their leadership, love, and life. Also, as a fervent consultant, educator, and speaker, Matthew delves into the human essence in varying managerial scenarios, making waves in personal, professional, intercultural, and organizational domains, which all sounds very posh, if I'm honest with you, Matthew. Welcome to the show. Great to have you on. Loved your bio.
Thank you, Matt. That's a good version. I'm going to ask if you can send that to me, because whoever did that, it's a much better version. And
Yeah.
I have to say, when I speak with someone with a good English and British accent, I always feel a bit smarter. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure you'll feel the same in about 40 minutes, Matthew. I'm not going to lie. It is funny, actually, that there is this, certainly when you're in the States, there is a certain, I don't know, you talk with an English accent and it just, things change. It just feels, whereas if I talk to people in England, obviously with my accent, it's different when you're in the States. I find it fascinating how accents from around the globe do impact us and do affect, how we think and behave, right?
I think your accent lifts people up. So thank you for that. At least Americans.
Bless you. So where's your accent from?
Well, I have a strange accent because I'm from Boston, but I don't have the typical Boston accent. I don't know if you've ever been to Boston, but the Boston
I have, and I would not have said your accent was from Boston. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. It's a bit aggressive and wild, right? They don't pronounce their as, so it's very open. They pack the car over there, right? And so I grew up in the Boston area, a small town, New England, the 10th of 13 children. But life brought me to many different countries, and so by speaking other languages, speaking Spanish and Italian. I lived in Ireland for 5 years, so I developed a strange accent. And so I always had, whenever I speak in public, I have to explain my background, because otherwise people spend the whole, whether it be a conference, whatever it is, trying to figure out where I'm from.
Yeah. That's interesting. I did hear a bit of the Irish twang then as well.
Oh, there, it comes up a little bit here and there.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I see. I've lived in various places, Matthew, over the years. I lived predominantly in the UK, but I did live in North Carolina for a little while. And so every now and again, there are certain words which I will say that just instantly take me back there, and so that twang then, that sort of southern drawl comes out a little bit. Right. It's quite fascinating, isn't it, how you pick up these little bits from different parts of the world.
It is. In what part of North Carolina were you in?
A place called Rockwall, which is about an hour north of Charlotte. It's near a town called Salisbury, and lovely little place.
Excellent. I lived in North Carolina, but more towards the water for 3 years when I was serving in the Marine with the Navy in the Navy.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So there's a large Marine Corps base on the.
There is. Yeah. Actually, Fayetteville, North Carolina, all those kind of places. There's all sorts of stuff going on, isn't there? So, yeah, amazing, really. So, right, we've picked up a few things already. You were 10 of 13 children, and you were in the military. And you've practically lived in most places in the known world. So we're not quite sure how to identify you with your accent.
Right. There we go.
Brilliant. So let's get started, because there's a whole bunch of stuff, Matthew, I want to get into, all of which some of them we just talked about. So let me start by asking you the question I like to ask all my guests, right? Do you, sorry, I should have asked you this before we hit the record button. Do you actually have your own podcast?
You know what? It's launching today, actually.
Seriously?
It's a very recent endeavor. But it's with but it's in Spanish.
Okay.
I live presently in Mexico City, so a woman down here who's very much into education, things like that, and has quite the following. And we met, and she's like, I want to start a podcast, and I want you to do it with me. So that happened within the last 2 weeks. So we recorded some episodes. Fantastic. And it's launched today. And it's called 7 Reasons Why. And it's in 7 Reasons Why in 17 minutes. But it's in Espanol.
7 Reasons Why. I don't speak Spanish. That might preclude me, but I would definitely check it out. Well, congratulations. I mean, this is awesome that today is the day you're launching your podcast. That was totally spontaneous and unplanned. And I love that. 7 Reasons Why is a great podcast name as well, by the way.
There you go. So, yeah. And she does most of the work, so I just have to show up for the recording.
They're the best kind of podcasts. I'm not going to lie. That's what I do. I just show up, have these conversations, and everybody else sort of deals with the whole fallout of it all over the place, which is quite nice. So, okay. Well, 7 Reasons Why. What's the podcast about?
Really, it's brief, so it's very to the point, but 7 reasons why that goes into any sort of life issue, human experience. So, we talked about, first of all, why we're doing the podcast, but we talked about reasons why relationships work, 7 reasons why young people can self-destruct, 7 reasons why leadership, why people are successful in leadership, 7 reasons why they fail. That's sort of, it's going to be across the spectrum of whatever is part of the human experience.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. So you've got this podcast, right? So here's the question. I'm now going to rephrase my question slightly. So you have your podcast, 7 Reasons Why. If you could have anybody as a guest on your show, Matthew, right, that has had a big influence on you, either is currently with us or someone from the past, anybody from the past. The only caveat is they've had to have had a big influence on your life. Who would you have on your show as a guest, and why?
Okay. Well, there's a few people that come to mind. And part of it, I was inspired by your last episode, by the guest that you had.
Okay.
And she spoke about her dad, and that made me think, I would have both my parents, because that's something that I wish I would have done. I discovered podcasting sort of after my parents passed.
Right.
And so they would have been in, and I'm sort of like, a lot of the siblings were like, we should have interviewed our parents more, because they had much just to understand, parents of 13 children. They adopted 2. I said that they had to outsource to improve the quality, right? And so they just very generous people, a fascinating lifestyle. They grew up in post-depression America. One of them, daughter of immigrants. So it's there was a lot of things there that I think we missed out on. Another person would have been Pope John Paul II.
Oh,
And
okay.
I was very kind of close relationship with him and with his inner circles. Another fascinating one, though, but hasn't someone that has influenced me, is any sort of dictator. To really, because I think we miss that as humanity, to kind of get into why dictators behaved and did what they did.
Yeah.
Whether it be a Stalin, whether it be a Mussolini, whether it be a Hitler or something like that. But one other fascinating one would be, and this is very much part of my story, is the founder. I was a priest. I was in ministry for 20 years.
Yeah.
I was part of a religious order, as they call it, Jesuits, Franciscans. So I was part of a religious order for 30 years. And it's very fascinating. It was started by someone who was a psychopath. And so
not normally what you'd expect. I'm not going to lie. I was not expecting that. Okay.
This was discovered much later in his life, and actually after he died, where a lot of things came to light. So there was a lot of, but anyways, there's a very toxic leader, but at the same time very charismatic. And it's interesting in the study of leadership how oftentimes charisma is very linked to toxicity in some leadership. And so it was amazing. So very, he started an organization that was one of the fastest growing organizations in the Catholic Church and Catholic history. Has done a lot of great work, great people involved, but at the same time had this dysfunction and depression about it. And that's sort of part of my story, also why I left. But my decision to become part of that was very influenced by him, by this. He was originally from Mexico, built this global organization. And I think he developed the personality disorders over time, which influenced his personal life and the way he led. So that he'd be a fascinating, because he died, and then when a lot of the scandals and dysfunction and a lot of part of his life and a lot of his abusive life came to the surface, and we were left with a lot of questions and without the end. So there was sort of an extended answer to your question.
Wow, geez. Yeah, no, we can rock up. There's so much in all of that. First, let's talk about your mum and dad then. So your mum was the daughter of an immigrant. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Italian immigrants, yes.
Okay. And so was your dad an American?
Yes. And he goes back to the Mayflower. So we would be part of the Mayflower Society.
Fantastic.
So it's very interesting. Really back to England, to the Puritans that left England. We spent a bit of a stint in Holland, and then took the Mayflower over. So they would go back to, that would be our roots on my dad's side.
Wow.
Not always well seen now in the American context, with the way they look at what the Puritans and what everyone did to when they came over to the States, whether it be Columbus or the other groups, with the indigenous people and all that. So there used to be a lot of, the Mayflower and the Puritans and all this, Thanksgiving and all that. But now there's a lot of mixed opinions about the history behind that. But that's where I come from.
Fantastic. So your mum's Italian, your dad is from the Mayflower generation. Why Spanish? Why are you then doing podcasts in Spanish? I'd get it if it was Italian, but what's the Spanish link?
Well, because I joined this religious order, and I did a lot of work in Spanish over the years. I've been speaking Spanish since '94. I lived in Colombia for a few years. In Colombia, South America. I lived in Chile, and now I'm in Mexico City. So I love Latin America. I love the culture, the vibe, the people, and language. So I'm very fluent and comfortable in Spanish.
Okay.
So down here, that's just the podcast just sort of came about. It wasn't like something that I was thinking about. It happened within the last 2 weeks. So there you go. But
I just find it fascinating. Yeah, they're fascinating.
I'll learn English at some point as well.
Okay. So the next person that you had on your list, so you had your mum and dad. Sorry to hear that both have passed. I'm intrigued by the 13 kids, because we had a guy on the podcast called Brett Curry, And Brett is an absolute legend. If you get a chance to listen to his episode, do. He's such a great guy. And he and his wife have 8 kids. Okay.
Yeah.
And he is still, out of all the people that I know, he is the one with the most kids that I know. Do you know what I mean? And could call up and go, hey, Brett, how you doing? But your mum and dad have gone a whole step further. They've added a whole other 5 to the mix and went for 13 kids. Were your parents Catholic, or did they just really want they just loved big family?
Well, they were Catholic. Yes. So I grew up in a very traditional Catholic household. I would say their openness to life, it was somewhat faith-based, but it was also just what they believed in. They believed in that openness to life and the beauty of life, and that however many children came our way was, my mother had a few miscarriages as well, and so however they're just very generous, and they did a lot of what we would call pro-life work, and helping family. They believe very much in family as the foundation of society. And I actually had an interesting conversation with my dad this was just a few days before he died. I was with him and taking care of him, and he didn't talk much. So, but he started to speak about his reflections as he was getting close to death, about the greatest impact. He said, the greatest impact that I can make in the world and in the afterlife, in eternity, is through my children. I will be able to live forever through my children. And it's the greatest difference that I can make in the world. And I never really heard that perspective and that take.
Wow. Which actually, if I think about, say, some of the passages in the Old Testament, what your dad said is one of these sort of deeply profound sort of ancient pieces of wisdom, isn't it? Because a lot of it back then was around your kids and especially your firstborn and the inheritance you leave to them, and that was very important in the community. And it's sort of very disparate now in today's society, which is an interesting problem in its own right. But it's a really interesting comment, isn't it? I remember buying my dad a gift a few years ago, and it just said on there, in a few years' time, or when when I'm older, it won't be about the amount of hours I spent in the office. It won't be about this. What will be important is that I was important in the life of a child, and it's that kind of thing, isn't it? Which having 3 of my own children, which is definitely nothing on your parents. But it.
You went for quality, not for quantity.
Sure, let's go with that. That sounds like a great theory. But I think it's having now been a father, and hearing your dad say that, there's something here deep in your heart that resonates with that and goes, yes, I love that as a concept. I love that as an idea. Living that out, I think, is an entirely different construct, right? But the sentiment behind it, I think, is deeply powerful.
It is, yes. I was really moved by that. I was driving him back from the hospital to home, and we had that unexpected conversation. It was very meaningful and impactful. And you're right. I think society, with capitalism and everything else and the fast-paced, governments do not facilitate family life. And I think that's one of the deficiencies in government. And so we make family life very challenging, more challenging than it already is. We make having children and they make it very expensive. And so, and then people, they have to make very difficult choices.
Yeah, it's an interesting, again, without getting too political, because I definitely don't pretend to have all the answers. I was listening to an interview where some city leaders, I think from the west coast of America, were chatting about what their city needed the most. So what was missing from their cities that if they had it would have the most impact? And the answer that they reported back, as best as I know, which I found fascinating, Matthew, was they replied fathers. That was what our city needed the most. We needed fathers. And how absentee fatherism is a really big problem in Western culture right now.
It is.
And you only have to look at the stats of, say, the people in jail. How many of them have come from households with absent fathers, right? And a lot of the stuff, like, I'm not saying that fathers are the answer to everything, because I'm not. I'm just saying that absent fathers is a societal problem that we do need to be more aware of, I think.
It is, yes. I mean, there's a crisis in masculinity and virility, which then affects, the crisis in fatherhood. There's a lot of different things that lead to that, and we're not saying, of course, that's not the only solution. But I think there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah.
And this is one of them, and it's an expression of sort of what we've been through as a society. Something has led to this, and I'm not sure if we're always addressing it in the appropriate way. But yes, it is. I hear it all the time. So, and there's a lot of research about it. So yes,
that's interesting. A crisis of masculinity. There's so many ways we could take this conversation right now, which I think is quite fascinating. But let's talk about you. So you were with the Catholic Church for 20 years. You came from a Catholic family. You're in the Catholic Church for 20 years. You're no longer with, let me put it this way, you're no longer a priest in the Catholic Church. Would that be
Yes, no longer in formal ministry. So it really was 30 years, because there's 10 years of training and education.
Sure.
And 20 years of active ministry, which brought me to a lot of different countries. Fascinating. And then also part of that was as a chaplain in the Navy and as a staff officer, which is it's a unique position in the United States Armed Forces.
Yeah, so yes, no doubt. And you would have seen some incredible stuff. I have absolutely no doubt, being a chaplain in the Navy.
Mm-hmm. One of the better decisions I made in life, and it's a fascinating experience, and just growth, of being able to serve those that serve in a very unique cultural context of the military, and being, very obvious. It's a very young population, it's very intense ministry.
Yeah,
because you're dealing with very intense stuff all day, because you're with. I worked at a base of 5,000 people, 5,000 men and women, Marines and sailors, and I was the chaplain. So I was there for everyone, and that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Massive humanity, but so beautiful to be able to impact. And part of one of the reasons why I wanted to do it was, it's a population I think is underserved in this regard. And secondly, I wanted to do a very diversified ministry, and not only deal with Catholics that were sort of in the pews, as you were saying, the ones that come to. I wanted to go out to the fringes, go out and deal and really serve a lot of other populations, and so military ministry and chaplaincy was a way to do that.
So how long were you in the military for?
Only 3 years.
Right.
It was, also had to do with my bigger decision of stepping away from formal ministry. So it was a hard decision to make, because I was really enjoying but I also knew that wasn't my place. And I said, well, why continue to do it if I already have the answers that I've been looking for?
Yeah, no, fair enough. So if you don't mind me asking, why did you step away from the formal ministry? What was that process?
It's a long process. There's a lot I could say here. I like to say that in life transitions, there's sort of 3 doors that lead to life transitions. One is our dreams. Mm-hmm. Another one is love, and another door is pain. And I have to say that there was mostly the door of pain, of really, it was sort of living in somewhat of a conflict with myself for a number of years, feeling like I had to put on this facade of living. I love so many elements of ministry, but I also felt that the lifestyle wasn't the right lifestyle for me. There was also organizational context and culture and mentality that I was sort of living in conflict with. And I could only do that for so long without it taking a very, very significant emotional and mental toll on me, which it did. And so I got to the point where I had to kind of raise the white flag and put myself in a clinic for a few months to get some real personal care. I was carrying around an internal crisis for a number of years, and I needed to deal with it in order to just live a more healthy and flourishing lifestyle. And part of that was then putting this decision on the table. So
wow, that was that. Let me not put words in your mouth. was that a difficult thing to do, or was that an easy thing to do when you'd made the decision?
Very difficult.
Hmm.
Very difficult. Even no matter how clear it became, it never became an easy decision. There's many levels to it, and that's why I took time. It's really from sort of the first time I put this possibility on the table as something that I wanted to consider, because I was resistant to even considering it for a number of years.
Yeah.
So that I would say from first of all considering it, maybe this isn't my place. Finally talking about it, and to finally making the formal decision, it was probably 6 years went by.
Wow.
So there was a lot of, and part of that was the sabbatical year that I took off, where I got a lot of professional care, and just so I call that year the journey of coming home to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of, theological, spiritual, emotional, mental, social level. There's all these different things that I needed to process and integrate and reconcile. Because yes, it's a hard decision because it affects so many elements of one's life. And then again, it was also not where I was for 30 years. And
Yeah.
so I had to sort of deal with a lot of, and again, just a lot of reconciling things so that I was at a place of goodness and of peace in making the decision. But
Yeah.
humanly, it became an easy, because it's just, I also stepped away from a lot of security and safety of what was known into the unknown.
Yeah.
And unlike other lifestyles, when you step away from ministry, even though those years all exist, but like financially they don't. It's not like you walk away with a pension or anything like that.
Yeah.
Financially and in many other ways, you start from zero, but with this huge amount of experience, the life experience, which I want to continue to build on.
Yeah.
So it was hard. It affects a lot of relationships. People are, you're viewed in different ways by people in the church. It affects family, especially when it's a very faith-based family. It's hard. It's hard for people to understand the decisions and to come around. It all just takes time.
Yeah. No, I've no doubt. It's because it sounds like, I mean, I haven't been a Catholic priest, so I have to be careful with what I say in a lot of ways, but I mean, when you're involved with something for 30 years, your identity is tied up into that, especially as something that is like ministry, which is, it requires more of you than a lot of vocational jobs, right? There is the whole pastoral side. There's the giving. You give a lot. Anybody that's in the sort of the ministry, the pastoral side of things, I think are amazing people because of what they do.
Yes.
So your identity is tied up a lot in this. So I
Very
can
much.
see the 6 years, on one hand, sounds like a long time. In another hand, it doesn't. So I can see what you're saying.
Right.
And it's not just financial, like you say, you're starting again from zero. I mean, that's a practical one that we can all get our heads around, I suppose. Right. But it's no longer, Father Matthew, it's just Matthew Brackett. And there's this identity issue So how did you reconcile some of that?
It's a huge identity. And it's important for us as human beings across the board, right? And I think it's a point that people struggle with in many paths of life, right? Even women with profession, with motherhood, with a lot of men, and just in the professional field, and retirement becomes a huge topic, right? Precisely because now in ministry, yes, it's called sort of all encompassing, because it's not only a profession, it's a lifestyle, it's a vocation, it's what they would call like a calling. It involves your whole life, your psychology, your spirituality, your mentality.
Yeah.
We could also kind of debate, how healthy that is or not. But yeah, so it does. It was the whole thing, and that's why I call that journey, my sabbatical year, a journey of coming home to myself, of sort of rediscovering who's the Matthew that got lost along the way. And while I was the priest, I was this and that, and I think I did a lot of that very well. But at the same time, I disconnected from so many elements of my humanity and from who I was. And that's not healthy for any human being to do. And sometimes there's some lifestyles that can lead to that. In professional lifestyles, ministry, armed forces, whatever.
Yeah.
Certain lifestyles that can lead to a disconnect from elements of who we are as human beings. And
so if you don't mind me asking then, what part of you had you disconnected from that you needed to reconnect with the most?
I think part of it was sort of, who am I? Right? I think, I would have grown up as a people pleaser, making people happy, serving as a way to do that.
Hmm.
And so sort of filling this void. And I realized over time that it's sort of like a drug that never satisfies. And you're constantly trying to fill this void of being accepted, and you never get enough of it.
Mm.
And so you're just going in, and then so there's, and I think the motives why I went into ministry probably weren't the best motives. It was sort of, part of it was I wanted to do something impactful, something important, something meaningful.
Yeah.
I grew up growing up in an environment where we were, the transcendence is very important. I want to do something transcendent, something meaningful. So there was that motive, but also there was a motive, I think, of I also just wanted to get away from small town New England, from my family, because in large families there's different things, but part of it is you kind of feel like you're lost in the bunch, and so I wanted
Mm.
to kind of find myself and do something meaningful in ministry. Sort of, it was a way to do that.
Yeah.
It gives you a platform, it gives you a place where you can do. So I don't think the motives why I did it. So what did I disconnect from? I suppose I disconnected from a lot of the emotional side of me. um, and sort of the feelings, when there's a huge focus on spirituality and on living up to certain ideals, we can disconnect from a lot of the more the human elements and emotional side of us, because in some faith environments those could be considered unhealthy or selfish or whatever it is.
Mm. Mm.
So there's sort of an over spiritualization, sublimation of these human elements, which
Yeah.
isn't helpful. It's understandable why people do it or why it happens, but not always helpful. So I
Yeah.
would say that. Um, and I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's the first thing that would come to mind. And I think it's also just the identity, this sort of living up to expectations
Right.
and doing it for many years. And I was put in leadership roles from a very young age. And so that puts extra pressure on you to perform at a
Hmm.
high level and to live up to these expectations as you mentor others who are following the same path. Again, it's so many beautiful memories. But I think that also led to a sort of comfort in not connecting with myself and not dealing with my deeper self.
That's
And
such a powerful phrase. A comfort in not connecting with myself.
yes.
It's. I'm writing that down. I will. I will let that ruminate for a little while. A comfort in not connecting with myself.
Let me say that I come across that a lot. I mean, I came across that a lot in the military, and I come across it a lot on professionals, because we want to be there for others. So many people, but oftentimes we have a hard time being there for ourselves,
Mm.
because facing ourselves in the mirror can be very discomforting. And when we do so with great honesty, right? And I think, didn't Michael Jackson have a song about the man in the mirror?
Yeah.
Right. And so again, that's.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's very discomforting to face ourselves when we do it with honesty?
Because we have to deal with some things that we don't like about ourselves, and we have to name them, claim them, as I would call, and reframe them, and maybe deal with some of the this can be some shame linked to those things. There can be some guilt linked to those things, and maybe there's things just from our past. And I often say that there's certain things, whether they be elements that we don't like about ourselves, or experiences or emotions, that we prefer to put into like a little closet or cupboard, hoping that they will disappear in the darkness.
Mm.
And there's some things that when we put them into darkness, they grow. And then they begin to invade our life in a very subtle way. And then from subtle, then it turns into more obvious ways. And that's my own personal experience, and for many people that I've worked with over the years.
Yeah.
And it's given me just a window into so thousands of lives,
Yeah.
which I've been able to walk on sacred ground of people's lives for so many years. I consider myself very privileged and fortunate. But going back to your question, I think it's that there's discomfort of dealing with the truth of ourselves, because there's a beautiful, there's truth that's very attractive about us as human beings, but there's also truth that is very, and that we don't like, because whether we call it ugly, whether we call it discomforting, whether we call it painful, whether we call it disordered, something, or brokenness. I like to talk about the beauty of our brokenness as human beings. There's just something, and so the less time that we pay attention to that, oftentimes the more at peace we seem to feel, until we're no longer at peace.
Until it's too late. Yeah. Until the whole thing's blown up. So how long have you been out of ministry now?
Formally, 2.5 years.
So you leave the ministry with all of these questions which you've been working through, and you finally make the decision to leave the ministry. What happened then? What did you sort of go into?
So as I was making these decisions, I was also preparing for my next. I'd already done my coaching certification a few years back. Finishing active duty and ministry, I started a master's program at Penn State University in the psychology of leadership, and I started my business, my practice, which is sort of, and it takes time, as you well know, to clarify what my business practice is. Right?
Yeah,
constantly evolving.
Yeah.
So that's so I stepped right in, and I just remember those first few days were very difficult, because again, it all happened. It didn't happen quickly, but it all happened in 1 week.
Yeah.
Right. Where all of a sudden, it was like I'm letting go, even though I knew why I was doing it, but I was letting go of all my securities and safety nets.
Yeah.
And it's only me.
Yeah.
And this vision that I have, and I know why I've done it, but holy smokes, and the whole thing about identity again, even though I'd done a lot of work on that, it's like, who am I? And I have to, professionally, I have to redesign myself. And so I go into what I would call a holistic leadership services, because when I say how I lead myself, how I lead in my intimate and inner circles, how I lead professionally, and then how I lead in organizational contexts. And unlike what a lot of people in corporate world would think, they think the people from ministry, like, you're not going to know anything about organizations. But I was part of the largest global organizations, whether it be the Catholic Church, whether it be the religious order that I was in, whether it be the Navy. So I learned how to navigate complex global organizations.
Yeah.
In a very good way, right? And leadership, I'm passionate about. First of all, I'm passionate about the human person. I'm passionate about the beautiful complexities of the human person, but also, and thus about leadership, because leadership will always be part of our human experience.
Yeah.
And leadership, when done well in a wholesome and healthy way, is very life-giving, whether it be in your personal life, in your intimate surroundings, or professionally.
Yeah.
When it isn't, when it is dysfunctional or unhealthy, it can be very destructive.
Both of which you've seen in the Catholic Church.
Yes. Yes, in many very, very varying environments, but yes. And I think when it happens in family, when it happens in faith, it touches the deeper fibers of the human person.
Yeah. And fast. Oh, jeez. So how do you? So many questions. I was trying to figure out. I'm kind of curious, right? Because in what you're doing, Matthew, there's this element of spirituality. Now, most guests who have been on the show would say that there is an element of spirituality in their lives, and it's not like we've talked about that to any nth degree. There's various things that we talked about. You seem like you are very spiritually aware of who you are as a person and some of the stuff that you have had to face. The Catholic Church has been an incredible force for good, but it's also been quite destructive in many ways, and we've seen that in the press. You're in the middle of all of this, right? So the guy that drew you into the order that you became a part of ends up a psychopath, I think was the word you used. How did you reconcile, or have you maybe is a better question, have you reconciled that in this institution of faith, which is supposed to represent the goodness of God to men on earth, that these things inevitably are going to happen because of, we're very broken people. How have you reconciled that?
I have, but I think I've been fortunate because I was on the inside, and so I've sort of been able to reconcile, sort of separate the divine, right, and the true and spiritual and goodness elements that we would link to the transcendent, to God, from the human element. So I can believe very much, let's just say I can believe very much in the church, but a sort of a great lack of confidence in criticism of the human element.
Yeah.
Now, it's hard for human beings because it's hard for us to sort of differentiate, because when you're part of any organization, it becomes very much part of who you are in your life, and you sort of want to take everything, right? And again, when I talk about faith and the dysfunction and abuse in the faith element, how it affects the deeper fibers, because we expect better and we expect more from organizations that say that they stand for better and for more.
Yeah.
And also because organizations are very linked to how we view God. Now, the very sad thing, Matt, that happens here is that we get the opposite effect. In other words, people, when they go through the dysfunction or whatever it is, or abuse in a faith setting, it forces them in most cases to reject not only the organization, but also God.
Yeah.
Because they can feel that what happened to them, what they went through, was in the name of God, when it's not necessarily the truth. Like that, it's not necessarily that, but it's very understandable that that's how we experience it as human beings.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the tragedy, is that many people walk away from something that in the end could be very life-giving for them.
Yeah.
As regards the faith element, but because of what the human element has done.
Yeah.
So
that's very, very insightful answer, isn't it? And like you say, not always easy to separate. Not always easy to separate in your mind the two things. If I can maybe ask you this question, you obviously are around in the ministry for 30 years. Do you still go to church?
I do, yes.
So you're still very much a committed, can I use the word member of the Catholic Church?
Yes, I would, but slightly critical.
I think, to be fair, that's most churchgoers, isn't it? Or it should be, at least.
I would say constructively critical, because I do care about the institution and about a lot of people in the institution. In fact, I'm going to give a conference to priests over the next few days. Because it means a lot to me that we make the church that we make. And I'll give conferences to any pastors. We need to make our faith organizations better. Yeah. And when we look at society, and there's a lot, like, we go on a lot of tangents here, but when we look at the loneliness in society, the sort of that, we've lost community, and part of that community that we've lost is also faith communities. Right? And if we talk about the Catholic Church, any large organization is slow to adapt, right? And the Catholic Church has been slow in the very fast times. The church has remained sort of outdated. Yeah. And right, and so do I go to church? Yes. Now, do I walk out sometimes during the sermon and then walk back in after? Yes, I do that. Because sometimes it just tests my patience too much. Yeah. Right. As priests, we can do much better in the way we nourish our people and the way Catholic services are managed. And if people aren't in the pews, it's understandable why. But oftentimes it has to do with the human element, and I think that's a very unfortunate.
So, bringing this back to leadership, as you were talking about leadership, being life-giving, you said that our religious communities need to do better to nourish our people better. That, if I join the dots, in other words, the leadership in the church needs to do better to nourish people. This is nourishing is part of leadership, isn't it? And caring for people and oversight and all that sort of stuff. So, I guess if you could wave a magic wand, right, and fix 3 or 4 key issues in the, I'm not going to just use the word Catholic Church because I don't want to pick on the Catholic Church. I'm just going to use the word church. But if you could, faith organizations, if you could, we need to do better. The leadership in churches needs to do better. I guess my question is, how do we do better? What are sort of 2 or 3 things that immediately jump to your mind based on your experience?
I would say really leadership training and education, because the pastors and whoever religious leaders are trained in many ways, academically, theologically, spiritually, and all of that has its place. But oftentimes the way they lead and the way they wield power, because leadership is always to power. Now, not necessarily, just because you have a position of power doesn't mean that you're a leader. But the fact is that you have power and how you use your power. And I have to say, in my military chaplaincy, the Catholic chaplains, we were highly respected by a lot of the other denominations because they understood the lifestyle of a Catholic priest and the education that we go through much more rigorous training than many other religious leaders.
Right.
So we were very respected in that regard. So if I look at a lot of religious denominations and churches, there's a lot of people that are in a position, as a pastor or whatever, and preaching, and more because of their charisma.
Yes.
Than because of their art of using power in a positive way. So in a lot of religious groups, I see extremism, right? And the way they wield their power over people is power is a very sacred thing. And it's often used very irresponsibly.
Yeah.
In religious settings, because people, when they go to church, they become very vulnerable, and they will drink whatever you give them.
Yeah.
Because there's a sort of innocence and a faith, and they go, and so if we're not feeding them the right stuff, then we're not nourishing them in a healthy way.
So powerful. And actually that's not just the church, that's business as well. I can point the finger at a lot of business leaders, and probably myself included, who are in positions because of a certain type of charisma they've managed to convince people to follow them. And there is a power that comes along with that. I think greater responsibility should be placed on church leaders, because I think they espouse a greater message, for want of a better expression. But I think any form of leadership, there is always the temptation to abuse power. And I'm reminded, I can't remember who wrote the book. Someone has given it me recently, and I really must read it, about servant leadership. And servant leadership strikes me as a sense of leadership that is in the opposite spirit to that, right?
It is, yes. And that was developed by Richard Greenleaf, and who was a Christian, and very scripture-based sort of leadership. He said, he came up with this term, servant leadership, which is about, serving. It's power is about how we serve our people and grow our people and make them better. So yes.
Powerful stuff. So leadership and training, and obviously you had a lot of this as a Catholic priest, but where would, I'm thinking, I've been in business 20, 30, I can't even remember, Matthew, if I'm honest with you, how many years I've been in business a while. But there are people who will listen to the show who are new to business or are new to leadership positions. Where would you recommend people go to get the training that you're talking about?
Well, there's so much in the marketplace now, somewhat saturated with offers, coaching and leadership training. And so you have to have sort of a discerning spirit on what's good, because there's a crisis of authority and leadership. There's the offer and demand has grown, and whenever there's an opportunity to make money, a lot of people jump at it. And I often say that people in the coaching or self-development world are great marketers, but might not be excellent at the services they offer.
Yeah.
I'm generalizing. So there's a lot of great stuff. So just a discerning heart and how you find that. But I am a firm believer in personal accompaniment, whether that be mentorship, coaching. Because, I just when I when I do coaching, and it forces you to slow down in life, which is often very hard for a high performing leader to do, or anyone, because you don't have time. When you have to slow down and pay attention to what's happening inside of you and what's happening outside of you, and that will always benefit you. You will always gain something from that. It's a growth in self-awareness. So I often say that self-awareness is one of the greatest leadership assets, but also the lack of one of the greatest leadership liabilities. It's sort of that blindness to ourselves.
Yeah.
And it goes back to things that I lived in my own personal life, right? But also what I dealt with many other people. So the coaching is very, and then good leadership. I'm not books are helpful, conferences are helpful, but you're not forced to exercise certain skills in that. You can read something, you can hear something that's nice, and then continue to live your life in the same way.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not downplaying books or conferences. They all have their place. But I think education and training is also important in how we develop our leadership skills. A lot of it's just learning. People, the difficulty, we're put into leadership roles. It happens in any organization, really, because it's the next, the traditional hiring or promotion system. Well, this is your next step if you want to make more money and continue to grow the organization. Well, this is your next step. But you might not be the right fit for that. So I really think that we have to come up with other ways to promote our people, which doesn't mean that we're put in leadership roles, because they might not be a good fit. They might not even want that, but that's the only option they have.
Yeah, there was a lot of research done by Google on that, wasn't there? The whole being promoted above your capability and finding a different way to promote staff and team, rather than just assuming that they need to go up to the next rung of the ladder includes a bit more leadership. If that's not the way they're wired, it actually can have an imploding effect.
Exactly. Yeah, you might have excellent at your technical skills, but that doesn't mean that you need to have a leadership role because of that. Just you flourish where you're at. Again, it's more that very personal approach to all of our people.
Yeah.
So I did the way we accompany people, as they step into these roles, and I would say the military was very good about that, because whenever you stepped into higher ranks, you had to go to certain mandatory training, education courses, and things like this. So, and just putting that into the systems, I think, is very important. Now, it's because it requires time, it requires an investment, and so company. But in the end, in the long run, there's a huge payoff.
Yeah.
But we often don't think about that. You asked me another thing that I would change, that I just or address in religious organization or any organization, is also how we deal with people, the human element, and whether it be professional organizations, whether it be faith. Because there's sort of a contradiction. Now let's just talk about faith organizations, is where we stand for the dignity of the human person. And a lot of religious faith groups or organizations also talk about there's brokenness about the human element.
Yeah.
But there can be a lot of judgment and very little compassion and mercy.
Yeah.
And so you kind of force people in a very difficult position where they're held to very high standards, and where oftentimes they feel that their humanity is not seen and considered. And that happens also in the professional space, how we just dealing with our people.
Yeah.
We have positions, but let's be people in our positions and deal with our people as people.
Yeah. It's very easy said, Matthew. This is why we need help trying to figure out what that actually means. But you're right. I think historically that certain elements of the church have been very good at trying to clean the fish before they catch it, for want of a better expression. And it's that critical judgment which says you're not living this life which I think you need to live. Change the way you live, and then you can belong. versus come and belong, and that might change how you behave, if that makes sense. It's an interesting sort of way of thinking of it. You know what, Matthew? I'm aware of time, right? I'm aware we have not done the question box, but I genuinely don't think we need to. It's been fascinating talking to you. No, let's do the question. Let's close on the question, because why not? Why not? We're here.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Yes, so I know we've gone so much we could have
through here. Oh yeah, we should do like a part 2, 3, 4, and 5. So tell me where to stop, and wherever you stop, that's the question we're going to ask.
Stop.
Okay.
We missed it.
We got it right here. So this is the question: what are the best things you owe your parents? Bringing it back to the start of the conversation.
Going back to our parents, I owe them a lot more gratitude and appreciation. I think I wasn't good about manifesting, expressing that when they life. And again, I could go on a tangent here about how death puts everything in perspective.
Yeah, it does.
So and I owe them for I think giving me for inheriting a very generous and loving heart and wanting to serve and do good. Also elements of me being a great connector and networker. My mother was very good at that. So that's what I would owe them.
It's powerful, isn't it, when you think about it? I think it's a very clever question. What are the best bits you owe your parents? Because I think it's easy to criticize our parents sometimes. I think it's easier to see what they did wrong. Because again, a bit like church leaders, I suppose, we have this perception that parents and church leaders probably should live a more perfect life than they actually do, and they're not really human. When we discover our parents' humanity, or the humanity of our political leaders or the religious leaders, we struggle with that, don't we? And it's an interesting question then to reframe that, which is, no, there are some good things you got from your parents. What are they, do you think? Right. That's a fascinating way of doing it.
Yes, and we owe them our life. That's where we got our life.
That's true.
There's so much to talk about that.
Yeah.
Parenting. But yes.
Wow. So what does, in the closing minutes, what does the future look like for Matthew Brackett then? What are we deliberately growing into?
Entrepreneurship has been very, very challenging, but I've been very intentional about it. I'm not sure if I have the entrepreneurial spirit, but I wanted to give it a try. So I'm not sure. I'm also applying for jobs, but I want, as regards my business, to continue to offer really transformational, life-giving coaching and mentorship and consulting to people of influence. I don't want to say leaders anymore. I just want to say people of influence. Really, it's in any sector of society. I do a lot of work with couples as well and parents, because those are people of great influence and how they influence each other and the family. And so there's that element, the personal element, and then the speaking. I really want to have a lot of speaking engagements because that's something that I did a lot of, and I miss that. And it's a way to also to nourish and impact lives in a big way. So that's my hope, is that will continue to grow.
Well, fantastic. Well, let's hope so, sir. And if people want to find out more about you, if they want to connect, reach out to you, maybe even get you on board as a coach. Because I think, just as an aside, coaching, if you're a leader and you don't have a leadership coach, can I please implore you to get one? Just for the reasons that Matthew outlined. And also for me, there's the accountability aspect.
Yes.
These guys will hold you to task, which is not like, did you go through your to-do list, but how did you treat people today? Those are I just think they're really important questions. How are you doing? How's your mental well-being, etc.? So do get yourself a good coach. That would be my, I have great business coach, leadership coach, friend, mentor, life. He's just an absolute legend. And I can see I can't necessarily see the benefits every time we talk, but I can see the cumulative benefits of many years of being connected, if that makes sense.
Right. And yeah, that's what we need. It's really a coach. It's not that a coach knows more. Sometimes they know more about a certain area, but it's really about facilitating a process of self-discovery.
Yeah.
and anyone benefits from that when that's done in a proper way.
Yeah.
So they can find me at bracketalliance.com. They can find me under Matthew Brackett on Instagram, Matthew Brackett at LinkedIn, Matthew Brackett at Facebook, all those different platforms. So reach out, definitely. And I have to say that a lot of my services, really, I hone in on that intersection between the personal and professional.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's sort of a holistic approach. If you don't want to do a lot of work personally and deep work, then I'm not your person. Okay, but my motto is lead better, love better, and live better.
Yeah. Very good. Top advice. Well, listen, Matthew, I genuinely loved this conversation. And it's good to talk about these things. And I'm fascinated and drawn into your story and, where you're going with life, really. And so, genuine pleasure to connect. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
Matt. Thank you very much. I look forward to part 2. But thank you very much.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, we will, of course, link to Matthew's info in the show notes, which you can get along for free with a transcript at pushtobemore.com. Or if you signed up to the newsletter, it will be coming straight to your inbox. So that's a wrap on another invigorating conversation. A massive, huge round of applause. In fact, I have to do this now because I've got the desk here. Yay! Thanks, Matthew, for shedding light on your inspiring journey. And of course, a huge thanks to today's show sponsor, Orient Media. For all you change makers out there contemplating podcasts, maybe you started a podcast today as well, just like Matthew is, yes. Then definitely connect with them at orientmedia.com. Now remember, keep pushing to be more. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcast from, because we've got some more seriously compelling conversations up our sleeve, and I don't want you to miss any of them. And in case no one has told you yet today, let me be the first to tell you, you are awesome. Yes, you are. Created awesome. It's just a burden you have to bear. Matthew's got to bear it. I've got to bear it. You've got to bear it as well. Oh, yes, that's the way it is. Now, Push to Be More is brought to life by Orient Media. For transcripts and show notes, swing on by the website, pushtobemore.com. And big kudos to the team that makes this show possible, including the beautiful and talented Sadaf Bainon and Tanya Hutzelek. And also shout out to Josh Edmondson for the theme music. So from Matthew and from me, thank you so much for joining in. Have an awesome week. I'll catch you on the flip side. Until then, keep pushing, and bye for now.